Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to another installment of Coffee Chats. You guys are probably familiar with my name and face by now, but in the event that you are not, my name is Kyra and Dawkins, and I have the absolute privilege of being one of the co-hosts of this beautiful, fun, illustrious space. Um, we really enjoy like facilitating conversations here and really making this feel like a safe space for creatives to engage on not only the what they explore from a content perspective, but also really cultivating the nuances of one's process. And so, kind of honoring the fact that we are in a coffee shop for coffee chats, I do have a beverage of choice with me today. I have a nice big mug of tea. I've been doing a lot of talking today, so I gotta coat my throat with warm liquids, etc. It's like a love tea, so it's kind of like an herbal situation. It's very good. I like it a lot. But in any case, um, with without further ado, without further pomp and circumstance, I'm so excited to bring on our guest for today because I had the absolute pleasure of working with her throughout the writing journey, which is true for a lot of our guests, but particularly with our guest today. And I think that she offers a very nuanced perspective on not only travel memoir in general, but the way in which a travel memoir not only coincides with the travel or the journey of the physical self throughout the world, but the journey of like the internal and emotional self. So without further ado, drum roll, da, 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 let's invite our guest. Woo! Hello, hello, hello.
Hi, Kyra. Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. So would you like to introduce yourself to our audience, Suma?
Yes, my name is Suma Mathai. I'm a first time author, which sort of happened kind of by accident last year. I mean, there was the idea of the book, but I didn't think there'd be actually a book that would come out within a year, which was amazing because I do have a day job. I'm a project manager by profession, IT professional for the last 25 years or so. So it was an interesting journey. Oh, very unlike my normal day-to-day job. So, yeah, and I've written a book about my travels because my other passion when I'm not working was to travel the world. And I figured since I've been to 6 continents, 25 countries, it had enough material to kind of give you the spread of the world in a book and through my eyes.
So I think that's absolutely wonderful. I think that I wonder how this actually presses naturally into the next question. So you mentioned that you had the idea for the book, and the opportunity to actually write it sort of happened by accident. That naturally segues into when was the moment you knew you wanted to write a book?
Great. There's actually 2 moments I was thinking about this. So there was the first initial thought process about a book that happened, I want to say, in 2008. So this was a couple years into my solo travel internationally. And I was on a trip with my siblings to Switzerland, and we had taken the train from Zurich to Lucerne, and we were coming back, and we had just seen the magnificence of the Alps, right? It's huge. It was still snow covered. There was parts of it, and it was just so beautiful. It was unlike anything I'd seen before. And the countryside was just so green. And as you're going through the train, I was just like pondering, and I'm like, ooh, I'm so blessed with my life because my 20s, I didn't really have the easiest, coming of age. It was a struggle. And through my 20s, I sort of figured out my spiritual journey. And then that led to my solo journeys, actually seeing the world. And that's the moment when I thought, I have some material that I could write a book someday, but it was more like a fiction. But it was just a thought. And I thought, okay, but maybe when I get a little older, I'll think about further. So that's where it was one. Then, fast forward 11 years later, I was in Cuba, my 25th country. And we were talking to I was with a group of people who were dancers. I was doing ballroom dancing, so this was from my studio. So a couple of the instructors, they were amazed at seeing old Havana, and they were like so excited because this was their first international trip. Meanwhile, I have already been several. This was my 25th. And so they were like, you must have a lot of material to write. I said, yeah, I do journal some and I remember a lot of my trips. You should write a book. And I was like, you know what? I should probably write a book on my travels. So that was the real sort of culmination of this travel memoir.
I think that, so a couple of quick things. One, it's funny that you mentioned Switzerland specifically because I actually used to live in Switzerland. Granted, I lived in Geneva when I was really, really young, and my parents took me to the Alps when I was that young. I don't really have like a very strong memory of it, but I remember wearing a
Yeah,
very, very heavy winter coat. I was like
yeah,
two, but
yeah.
I visibly remember that particular moment. So it's interesting that that was one of the moments when you realized you had enough material to write a book, or the kind of material that could lend itself to a book
Yeah.
someday. I actually have a follow up question, but the
Yeah.
follow up question I have actually connects to the next question. So
Okay.
first, I'll ask the next question. Sort of
Yeah.
talking about, so you described how you sort of came to the realization that you had the material to write a book, and there were two distinct moments where you knew that you could sort of press into it and cultivate it into the final product that you have
Mhm.
today. But how would you say, especially in that shift from writing a work of maybe fiction into writing a memoir, how would you say that vulnerability ended up shaping the content of your travel memoir?
So when I did the Switzerland trip, it was still very early in my travel days. I had just only begun to, scrape the edge of traveling the world. And as I went further, there were moments, right, when you travel alone, one of the key things, especially as a woman, it's not particularly safe, right? And so there's that vulnerability aspect. And the thing is you don't get fearful of it. You need to know how to harness it. So to me, there were two factors. Before I started my, international journey, I went on a spiritual journey. I'm a very faithful follower of Christ. So to me, that was a spiritual journey. And one of the things that I learned through that spirituality was being vulnerable and surrendering to God. And what it does is it changes the meaning of vulnerability from being something you're afraid of to something you can surrender to God and be fearless and still know your limitation and you work around it. So when I travel solo, I avoid places that could put me in harm's way because I'm aware of it. I'm not stupid about walking into danger because I didn't think about it. My sixth sense is always on the high alert. And I grew up in a city in India. So as a girl, naturally, you're watching your six all the time. It's subconsciously
Yeah.
built into you. And you live in New York City, if I'm not mistaken. So you
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
how do you go? Because I have traveled to New York City alone, and they're like, "How do you do that?" I'm like, "Well, because it's that awareness of sixth sense and knowing, where you can be vulnerable and being sensible and smart about it, so you can actually enjoy without not having the experience."
Right, exactly. I think another, so it kind of spilled over into my follow-up question, but it presses into what you just said. So I think that's something I really appreciated in that you shared, is that the very content of your book, the very act of traveling is, to your point, an exercise in vulnerability and in surrender. I really appreciated what you shared about your faith. I also happen to share similar faith. Um, and that really helps me stay grounded. I'm actually about to go to Uzbekistan on Sunday. So, international travels, and there definitely seems to be a caliber of vulnerability that happens, an amount of surrender that does happen. But I think that another question I wanted to ask you, in terms of not only the vulnerability in your travels and your vulnerability in relationship to your journey across the world, how would you say, how was how did writing the book feel like a vulnerable process?
It
Like,
was
did it feel
well, it was
cathartic?
some moments because I had to figure out what am I writing, how am I going to write it. It's about me. And one of the things was the concept of humility. How do you write a book still being, having shown humility without being like, oh, I'm the greatest thing on the planet? So that was, and because it's a memoir, it's even harder because it's not about somebody else, right? It's about you. And I'm like, I don't, and I, growing up as a Christian and like, having that faith, it's very hard for me to just be pompous. So to me, I had to, but you had to write as well. So I remember my revisions editor saying, why are you being shy about it? I mean, you did that. It was a great thing. I'm like, okay, I guess so. And then, he helped me really carve out the revisions. What came out of the revisions from the draft was a significant change because he helped me overcome some of that without sounding extremely pompous. So that was the thing that I had to master in writing it. That vulnerability of like, okay, do I want to sound like that? But then otherwise it would be boring. So you had to kind of figure out how you navigate without it being boring.
Oh, wow. I mean, to be honest, I mean, it makes complete sense, but I didn't even think about that. Because oftentimes when people tell their stories,
Yeah,
sometimes you forget the amount of not just vulnerability in the sense of like airing out emotions, but vulnerability in the sense of these are the things that I've done, and you have to trust me in that I'm not trying to brag. I'm just trying to share my experience for the benefit of other people.
right.
Hmm. And no, in knowing you, you radiate like a calm humility. So I have the privilege of knowing you, and I think that that it comes through in your writing as well.
Yeah.
But I guess another component too is since did you feel that at any point inside of your journey, actually, before I ask this next official question, I have a follow up question. So, when was the moment that you realized that you wanted to write a book about your travels and not make it fiction? Like, did you ever entertain the notion of making it a fictional story?
So the fiction was in the beginning because I didn't know what all I'm going to see. And then the Cuba, that conversation with my instructors is what really changed. And I said, well, because I didn't know at the time of Switzerland, I had no idea I was going to see 6 continents. But then in 2 years, I managed to cover all 6 continents within the 2 year span. So that was like, oh, that's a good story. Like, how many people get to do that and actually see through it? Because to me, it was very interesting because when I did the Arctic Circle trip, that was in 2013. That's where the concept of, okay, hey, do you have a bucket list? I'm like, well, I don't really have a bucket list. I want to see the world. So I'm going to see the world. And so there was no bucket list per se. So I did that. So that was Europe. That was long. So that's where I met a lot of other travelers because that was my first like big group travel. So you met new people from Australia, uh, US, Canada, Singapore, like India, including us who were from the US. So it was like a lot of people. So it was interesting group of people. Though my friend and I were the youngest. I mean, we were in our late 30s. Everybody else were at least 15 years, 12 to 15 years older to us. So it was a big generational gap. And it was interesting. And they made a remark. They're like, you girls are brilliant. You should see the world when you're young, not when we are old, because then you're carrying a pillbox with you. And so that in one of those conversations is where the bucket list topic came up. And then I was like, well, I haven't seen I would like to see all the continents because I figured it's quite impossible to see the entire world. I mean, maybe it could happen, but this was more realistic and achievable. So that's when I set out to build that plan. Uh, the Northern Hemisphere was already covered, but that year I did the Arctic Circle. I went home. The next year I did like Michigan. We went around Lake Michigan. We did a road trip around that. So I kind of considered that as America. That October I went to India on business, but I also got to see the Taj Mahal again as an adult because I'd seen it as a teenager. So that was like, okay, there's Asia. So there's like 3 continents. And then I said, okay, I've not seen the Southern Hemisphere. So then came Peru, Sydney, Australia, and South Africa in 1 year. So from August 2014 to August 2015, I had seen 3 continents, three complete
That's
new
so
countries.
cool. That's so cool.
That's why I was like,
Yeah,
hey, I do have material that I could write about me in a book or my travels in a
that's
book.
awesome. That's so cool. I also really appreciate again how it all seems serendipitous is not the right word, because especially after you decided that you wanted to see all the continents, you were very intentional about it. But
Yes,
you, again, you approached it with such like a excitement and like humility that it's not like, ah, yes, I'm gonna see the world and everybody's
yes,
gonna be impressed. It's like you wanted to cultivate that journey for yourself.
right.
So, another question that I have pertaining to the writing process and really
Yeah,
reflecting on your
yeah,
travel, would you say that you had to take, so were there ever times when you felt like you had to write about something emotionally heavy? And if so, like, did you have to take emotional breaks from the writing process? I mean, regardless of like what the content is, there are
yeah.
probably times where you had to take breaks. And if so, like, how did you navigate that?
Yes, so I think the good thing about writing this travel memoir was we were just coming out of the whole heaviness of the pandemic, right? So it was, so for someone like me who traveled internationally almost every year, 2020 sucked big time. And then 2021 didn't show much relief. And so to me, I was stuck at home for the first time in my life for like 2 years, really not doing much. I did a little bit of Rhode Island, that's it. And so I had no emotional moments in the book, but I think I was coming out of an emotional phase in life because we were all so stuck up in at home, the uncertainty. I was miles away from family. Like I lived basically in isolation for almost hey, three-fourths of the year in 2020. So like I didn't meet anybody. It was just online, but nobody in person. So that was the emotion that I was coming out of. And this writing this book actually provided relief for me. It was really cathartic. It was just like as I wrote, I had happy memories from when I traveled that helped me come out of the pandemic even more cheerful than while I was living in it. So it was that sort of emotional process that I had with the writing. So it actually was very, very helpful. There was some stress, I think, with the draft manuscript. I'm a project manager, so I'm a deadline writer too. So I was like, well, if I got to get this done, I need to like say I got to do this. So I put in a deadline. I started well, it was difficult to frame how my book was going to shape up. I had all the journal notes, but how am I going to make it flow from one thing to the other? Because there was gaps in, the periods of time. And so I finally did talking to my developmental editor, and he kind of said, well, maybe, kind of visualize it or something. And so I took sticky notes and started putting in, okay, these are all the things I did, made like a mind map. And once I got that in, I was like, all right, I can write the draft manuscript. And I said, well, I'm giving me a month. I know the deadline was June 17th, but I'm going to get it done by Memorial Day weekend. And I just went at it. And so I was like driven. So I woke up in the morning. I used to wake up early, go for my walk, yoga, and then write. And then I start my regular day job, finish it in the evening. I do a little bit of it, and then every day. So by Memorial Day, it was like, wow, I did a lot of writing. I was like, I would take, I would take walks, just go for a walk. Um, and then I had the incentive was I was not going to watch the Top Gun Maverick movie because I'm a big fan of jets, the flying fighter jets and stuff. That was huge. So I said until I finished this manuscript. So I did do that.
Oh, that is a great incentive. That's
Yeah,
so smart. I sometimes do that with movies and TV shows. Like, I can't watch this until I finish this.
right. So it was good. So I think it was like definitely the month of May last year was interesting in that like I really applied my project management discipline and uh, planning aspect of it to my writing process. So it really helped me in understanding it. So I'm like so appreciative that I had my editors like keeping me on track because that's what I do with my team when I run a project. Here's your task, here's your date. Did you get it done? How much did you get it done? So it's that sort of thing. So I kind of blew Zach's mind away. It's like, oh my God, she's flying. I said, dude, I'm going to finish it. I'm not going to leave half-baked manuscript. It's going to be the entire book. I will
Right.
tweak it. It was easier for me to do the revisions because of that. Because
Right. Exactly. Pushing through as much of it as possible, even if it's a messy first draft, it's better to
Yeah,
have a complete first draft before
yeah.
you press on and try to do other iterations.
Mm-hmm.
So you actually started to press into a later question that I have, but a question I wanted to quickly ask before that is around. So the topic for today is again how to embrace vulnerability in writing, and so much of what you wrote about and aspects of like your messaging involve, I mean, the very vulnerable act of traveling as a woman for one,
Yeah,
but also sort of embracing vulnerability in your own writer's voice and the fact that it's your voice telling your stories. So,
yeah.
how would you say that vulnerability, or does it play a role in sort of creating like how you speak about your experiences? And how do you think, how do you relate to your voice as a writer? Like, do you see yourself like adopting a very particular register when you're writing? Or do you think that there's a natural progression between how you talk and how you write?
I think it's kind of both. So there's a certain amount of vulnerability that plays in because I, getting to write, right? It's something you're saying and you want to say it in a way where you need to have enough information, also knowing that maybe you don't, and in which case being humble about it and kind of saying, okay, maybe I have to do a little more work. And so when you start building that, you don't just write nonsense, you actually believe in what you're writing, because that's important. If you can't believe what you've written, then it's not worth writing. So to me, that was the factor, like being aware, that self-awareness was important in my writer's voice. And so I know that. And then I try to, your first draft, you do this, and then how do you say something more pleasing without hurting anybody else, putting anybody else down? And you kind of fine tune your language and make sure it just comes across. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all.
My mom used to say that all the time. Well, she still does. And I think as a quick follow-up question to that about your writer's voice, what's something that surprised you about the writing process? Like, were you taken aback by the language you found yourself using?
So which is interesting, but I think I use a lot of phrases, and I think it comes from my upbringing, and a lot of my English is really rooted in UK English, so it's like the British English. So I use phrases, and actually my usually write words and spell words that way, which had to be changed when the copy edit happened. And I've had one of my American friends who bought my book and said like certain phrase, like I wouldn't have thought to say that. I'm like, well, I've heard different idioms, I've heard different metaphors and things growing up, so I applied that, and you would see that in my writing. It's not an American book because I have that different cultural background that speaks into my writing, and I don't shy away from it. So to me, like that's my roots, so I'll speak as I've learned.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's funny because I like sometimes when I think of American English books versus like British or UK English books, like it's just subtle things. Like for example, I spent a semester abroad in Ghana, and so the English they speak there is mostly more British informed.
Yes.
So they say, whereas in the US they would say like, oh, this is mandatory. When we were there, they would say it's compulsory. So just like
Yes.
very
Yes.
small like language tweaks that
Yeah.
if you're aware of the cultural difference, you know that it's there. So
Yeah.
I think that's really fascinating. And having that additional layer actually adds further nuance to your international experience.
Right. Yeah, and I speak like even India like is a melting pot. So you've got like different language, like very distinct languages. Like you could be in a different state and have no way to communicate to that person because it's as different as Greek or Italian. Even the script is different. You wouldn't be able to read it unless you studied the language. So there are like nuances that you grow up with that kind of shows in my writing. And I was like, well, I'm not going to shy away from that. That's me. It's my voice. So I ensure that my cultural upbringing is still in the book.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of the UK, one of our wonderful audience members, Mage, is in
Hey,
Birmingham right now.
that's
Woo!
awesome. Hello.
Hello, Midge. Yeah, I think it's so cool because again, we have an international audience. We really enjoy like exploring have the interplays of language because I think that language naturally shapes storytelling, especially in your case with a travel memoir. And I think it's
Yeah.
beautiful that you embrace your own relationship with language in talking about your travels in the world because international language considerations, like married with international travel, just seems like a natural thought progression.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So thank you, Mage. Oh my gosh. So I something you started to touch on a little bit earlier too
Yeah.
would be how you found that first of all that you're a deadline writer and
Yeah.
you were able to set deadlines for yourself and like push yourself, but it was very helpful to have like editors and other authors throughout the journey. As a project manager, like you, since you do this also in your professional life, why do you feel it's important for authors to pursue community and or external accountability in the creative process?
Well, because I think there's two different energies, right? Creative is very fluid. It can move different ways. There's no control. There's no like set dimensions. So you need somebody who's on the outside who can set that for you, because otherwise you can get carried away in your creative process. And when you're a project manager, like you're not doing the coding, you're not doing the testing, you're laying out the plan. So you own the plan. So it's easy to build that structure because you're not married into the other piece, and you can guide the team. And that's what having this community helped me, because they provided that service for me. Because then I was free to think in whichever direction I wanted, but keeping me still within the guardrails of time and schedule and staying on point with that. And so that's why it was very important. I think it would have been harder for me if I was just going to write and say, okay, I'll wait till I finish a manuscript. I mean, I might say, well, I'll do this today, and then, well, I got something else, I'm going to run off and do that. This gave me every day I got to do this. I have dates every week. I'm meeting with this guy. So both my editors, I said, well, I have standard meeting 7:30 or 7 o'clock. I meet every Wednesday because I started on a Wednesday with the developmental editor. I did the same. And that way I knew on Wednesday I got to get whatever I have to do done for the book done so we can have a conversation. And so that was very helpful. And I think it would be prudent, I think, for most authors to do that, because it's very easy to get out of discipline.
Right. That is actually something I appreciate because the other thing too that I feel like you did an excellent job of identifying is you are a project manager, but you still benefited from somebody else doing the project management step of
Yes.
this journey because trying to hold both in your brain because then your creative brain might tell the product manager brain like but the creativity is more important, but so
Yeah.
other times the product manager brain will be like but you really have to adhere to this deadline. So the fact, like, to your point, having an external metric of accountability like gives your brain more space to do one thing or the other, and in
Yeah.
this case it's better. In this case it made more sense for the product management step or the accountability step to be outside of you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because then it took away the burden, because this, I mean, creative process, it can be very challenging because you don't know how it's going to shape. I mean, I'll show you how my thought process went on creating like what the book would look like. So this is what I did. I still keep it here as a memory. So that is how I decided the content and lay flow of my book. And so when you're a project manager, like you can't work with that. I mean, you need to have different. So this is just sort of like, stick this, do that. Uh, so you need to let that creative process flow without worrying about the other thing.
Right, that makes sense. And that's a great memento. I think I still have some of my note cards from when I wrote my novel. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because those are like great, because I real because I this part visual, because creative process does visualize a lot, versus the other one is just, it's very documented, it's analytical, and so you're like trying to see the vision, and you have
Mm-hmm.
the book.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said. So I just want to say thank you so much, first and foremost, for all of your insights today. I think that vulnerability played a very distinct role inside of your journey. You did an excellent job of articulating it, from the actual content of you being like a woman who travels, to the nuances of sharing that in your own voice through your memoir. And I guess my final official question for you would be, do you have any final words of wisdom that you would like to share with our audience members?
I guess don't be afraid to be vulnerable. There's a different connotation. Take the positive, be aware, and when opportunity presents itself, take it. That's again being vulnerable, because you're letting go of the fact that it might be fearful or it may fail. It doesn't matter. Go try it.
Beautifully said. I mean, just to touch on something you said a little bit earlier, I think vulnerability requires faith, and different people navigate that journey in different ways. But
Yes.
that is a very beautiful point. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Suma. Thank you so much for joining us. I learned so much. I had a wonderful time. I mean, I knew it was going to be great. I really enjoy working with you, and your topic gripped me right away. And I'm so glad that your book is out in the world. Is there anything you'd like to share with our audience about your book, your platform, before we say goodbye?
Yeah, so I think so. The book, I mean, it was my first passion was traveling, and it was really great to see the writing side, because I always knew I've been a poet. I write, random poetry here and there, and so this literature has always been part of it. So it was nice to see the two merge. And one thing I would like to say is, in terms of designing the book cover, those are all pictures I took on my travels. Like, those are my collection, except of course mine, which was taken by a fellow traveler on another trip, on the Arctic Circle trip. So that was in, fjords of Norway. That's where was that picture was taken. But the design, like the concept, my brother came up with the idea of, like, having that sort of book tear apart kind of thing and have the title go there. And then working with our designers, I was able to marry the concept of, I wanted to make sure there's maps and continents in it, and with that idea, and that's how we came together with that being the book cover. So it was a fun exercise. I think overall it was great creative process. I enjoyed writing the book, and hoping people will read and, be inspired to travel and see the world. I can do
Yeah,
it, so can you.
beautifully said. Well, Suma, thank you so much for joining us. And please know that you are welcome to come back to the coffee chat space whenever you would like, and bring your beverage of choice.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks, Kyra. I really enjoyed
Thank
being
you. Thank
here.
you. Yeah, thank you. I hope you have a wonderful one.
You too. Have a great night, and have a great tomorrow and a long weekend coming up too. Hopefully it's nice and sunny like it was today.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thank goodness for the summer.
I know we're pretty close to it.
Very close. Bye, Suma.
Bye.
Well, beautiful people, another wonderful coffee chats in the books. Again, I learned so much from Suma. I think that in that conversation went super smoothly. I learned so much. I think that there's a real beauty again in vulnerability and the faith it takes to jump into, like, particularly expressing yourself. That requires vulnerability, and it requires a faith that's dovetailed with it. And so, basically, if you have any thoughts on other coffee chat topics you'd like to discuss, if you would like to be on coffee chats, if there's a particular person you would like to see on coffee chat, if there's a particular topic you would like to see us discuss, do not hesitate to drop them in the comment section below, because we do read them and they do inspire us. We also thank you so much again for your engagement. Our channel has officially surpassed 1K subscribers, which is awesome. But the more engagement we have from you guys, the better. And the more we're able to produce more content for you to really spark these very pertinent discussions. So if you would like to contact us, you can contact us at the email addresses listed inside of the description below, or you can find us on Instagram. I am Kyra Ann Dawkins, like at Kyra _Ann _ writes, and my co-host at author M Finklea. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. Please stay happy, healthy, and safe wherever you are. Thank you so much, beautiful people. onward and upward. And don't forget to bring your beverage of choice. Bye, everyone.